This lecture will be an overview and introduction to primatology, covering what is primatology, what are primates, what kinds of traits do they have, and why do we care, and we will meet some of the living primates. Humans are primates, so if you didn't know, humans are primates, and studying animals that are also primates but look different than us can tell us something about our different evolutionary trajectories. All primates that exist and do not exist anymore are all mammals, and we may be one of the oldest mammalian groups. Genetic estimates put that the primate group may have been around for about 91 million years. That is before the dinosaurs went extinct. So that's crazy to think about. I can't even comprehend or actually visualize how much time that would be. So the other primates, non-human primates, so for the rest of this lecture, when I say primates, I will probably be referring to non-human primates. I just don't want to have to say non-human primates every time I say primates. But we are considering them as distinct from humans, even though we are primates for a second. So we will consider those two things distinct. When I say primates, I'm talking about non-human primates. Primates' close relationship to humans makes them ideal for studying humans via something called homology. Homology is looking at traits that are shared between different species because they were inherited from a shared ancestor. So, if for something to be a homologous trait, it needs to have been inherited at some point in multiple species, or in this case, we can just talk about one or two, but for it to exist in both of those species and be homologous, they need to have inherited it from a shared ancestor at some point. An example of this in the primate group are opposable thumbs. So we can move our thumbs around every which way and kind of, I mean, we can't do a full 360. Some people have hyperflexibility or hypermobility. That's not really me. We can do a bunch with our thumbs, a bunch of different things. We can do this with them. That's the opposability of them. But other primates and us, we all have this. And it could have, option one is we all could have developed it independently. Sometimes that does happen by chance or because something is beneficial in a particular environment. But in this case, we all have thumbs to game with, right? Or to text because they were inherited from a common ancestor a very long time ago. So on my screen, I've got, an evolutionary tree that we're looking at. We'll learn the name of it in a second, but back here at this node, there was the origin, the original development of the opposable thumbs in primates, and because they were so useful, all descendants of that ancestor in these modern groups now still have opposable thumbs. But pandas have this thing called a false thumb. It's still a thumb, it's not opposable, but that is not related at all to the thumb in our primate lineage. That developed on its own, and they don't really use it so much, but that developed on its own. So that would not be a homologous trait. So many non-human primates live in environments today that were quite similar to the environments of our ancestors. So they show traits that are quite similar to us, to humans. For instance, we and baboons, we both have relatively long legs compared to our overall stature. And this is because it's beneficial in the habitats that we lived in and baboons currently live in. So humans evolved longer legs about 1.7 million years ago when we started walking in savanna-like habitats. These savanna-like habitats or environments did not have a lot of trees because it's likely that the last common ancestor we shared with chimps was an arboreal creature. It lived in the trees. But as trees started to go away and the climate became more sparse, a little more space between the trees, we had to locomote on the ground for further distances, and longer legs was helpful for doing that in an energetically efficient way. However, baboons developed this trait independently. We did not inherit it, even though we are both primates, we did not inherit it from a shared ancestor. The hominin lineage that would become what modern humans are today evolved it independently of the baboon lineage. But the reason that we both have long legs is because we evolved in similar environments, these savanna-like habitats where we need to cover vast distances between point A and point B. So long legs are not homologous in us and baboons. You have to describe the groups you're comparing because if I just say long legs are not homologous, who am I talking about? They might be homologous in some groups, but these two specific lineages, this is not a homologous trait. We developed it independently in our separate lineages because it was helpful to the similar environments that we lived in. That makes it an analogous trait, like the word analogy. So long legs between us and baboons are an analogous trait, something that evolved in a similar for a similar reason in both of us. Another example of an analogous structure in multiple different species are wings. And a lot of times if you look at the skeletal structure of animals, you can tell like how closely related they are. So we can look at the wings of a bird versus a bat, and we can look at the skeletal structures and we can see that they're quite different. Like the bat wing, it almost looks like a hand that's spread out with the bones, that's filled in with like this thin like skin fibers basically. But the bird wing, more look, I mean, if you've ever had a chicken wing, that's what it looks like. The skeletal structure is a lot more like dense and it doesn't spread out quite as much as the bat one. So they look fairly distinct. And that tells us that these wings are probably not inherited from a shared ancestor. They probably developed for different reasons. And in fact, they did. It has to do with the environment that these animals inhabit. They both spend a lot of time in the air environment. And so wings were beneficial to both bats and birds and butterflies, right? Butterflies even have a totally different kind of wing, with no bones in it. So wings themselves, if you compare these different species, they are analogous. They all helped those different species survive in their shared environment. They all live in uh, the air above land. They don't live on land, they live like in the air most of their lives, or at least it's a big part of how they survive and get from point A to point B. So it was beneficial to have this structure for all of these species, but they didn't inherit the shared shape. It arose independently, and we can tell that by looking at the really crazy different structures skeletally, or in the butterfly case, not skeletally, but in the overall morphology of it, the macro structure of it. So these little charts that I've been showing you that look like these little evolutionary trees with little nodes and these bracket-looking things, those are technically called cladograms. And they show evolutionary relationships between species. They're really helpful because I don't want to obviously look at the entire animal kingdom. That's going to be overwhelming. We want to concentrate on the groups of focus. And so these cladograms help us do that. Now, on the screen, I've got several brackets and nodes that are colored in with certain colors, and some of them say not a clade and some of them say a clade on there. A clade is a group that includes an ancestor and all descendants, whether living or extinct, of that ancestor. But the nodes here, these meeting points of the brackets and the lines that extend out from them, those are what I'm calling nodes. Those represent a last common ancestor of whatever those groups that we're seeing are. And we'll see more of these as we move through. But I like to use a simple trick to tell if something is a clade. I like to envision that if it's drawn onto a piece of paper, I'm gonna imagine that I have a pair of scissors in my hands, and I'm gonna try and figure out, okay, is the square that's on the screen, can I remove it from the rest of the tree, the cladogram, with a single cut, with one cut, if I have like this drawn on paper, and I take one cut right through that one branch, will it fall off from the rest of the structure? So, I mean, or you could just imagine holding this in your hand as a 3D object. And if you cut off this one branch right above the node, does the colored square fall off at one cut? If it takes more than one cut, then the answer is no, it's not a clade. So, we'll look at this blue one right here. It's a singular bracket with one node. I can cut right above that node, and that entire branch will fall off. That entire square will fall off that structure. That is a clade. Over here, we've got two brackets and two different nodes, but they are all connected. If I put my scissors, my imaginary scissors, and I snip right here above that green square, that entire section of the cladogram will fall to the floor by itself. That is a clade. Now moving over to this red one, and this is a bigger picture of the red one down here, but you can see that there is a part of a lineage over here on the left, and then there's a bracket and a node over here on the right. Now, the problem is that if I take my imaginary scissors and I cut the right part it's still going to be connected to the left part over here. And so it's not going to just easily fall off the structure. I would have to make two cuts in order to get this entire red square to fall off onto the ground. So that can't be a clade. Over here, this orange one, it's pretty big, and it does include this last common ancestor node at the bottom. That's great, except for even if I make a cut right there, it's still connected to this part over here, this right branch that isn't quite in the orange square. It's still connected to that. So I would have to do a separate second cut with my imaginary scissors. So that cannot be a clade. So using the imaginary scissor test in your brain is a really easy way to tell if something is a clade or not a clade. And we like working with clades because using that last common ancestor as a reference is very, very helpful to us figuring out patterns in development and evolutionary history. We can talk about types of traits and how we might classify them. So we can classify traits in general as derived or ancestral to determine which species are most closely related to one another. Ancestral traits are those that have been inherited from a distant ancestor. So for instance, all primates have body hair because we are mammals. That means that an ancestral mammalian species at some point evolved this mutation that, had this mutation that allowed for them to grow body hair, and we have retained it throughout our lineage, just passing it down because it was beneficial. Now, humans are kind of the weirdos of the primate world in that we do not have a lot of body hair, but we will learn in a different lecture that humans actually have basically the same amount of hair follicles as any other primate. We just have a lot thinner hair, and there are reasons for that. So foreshadowing. Oops, sorry. I want to show you this diagram over here on the right. So I want to be clear that when we are discussing whether a trait is ancestral or derived, it always depends on what group we are looking at, what clade we are looking at. So for instance, something is not always derived or ancestral. It depends on the groups. So if I just tell you, if I give you this diagram right here and I say, okay, are mammary glands ancestral or derived? You should immediately be asking me for who, for what group, because you can't just look at this and be like, yeah, because it could be either. And I'm going to show you what I mean because I know that might be kind of abstract. So let me get my pen. So an example question you might get is for the group, for the clade, that includes the species of platypus, kangaroo, and elephant. Is the trait of, let's say, body hair. Is a trait of body hair ancestral or derived? So the first thing I'm going to do is locate my group right here. That's my group. I'm going to draw the clade. So you've got to include that last common ancestor right there. So let me give you a little bit more space there. So my clade, I've got to include this last common ancestor, that node right there, that all three of these lineages can be traced back to. So platypus ends here, kangaroo can be traced back to it, elephant can be traced back to it. That's our last common ancestor of all three of those species. So this is our clade. And now we're going to locate the trait that I just asked you about, which is body hair. So that is that blue dash right there, that body hair. All we're going to ask ourselves is that trait outside of our circle that indicates the clade, or is it within that circle that defines the clade? If it comes before, and by before I mean lower down here, because here's our starting node. This goes back and back and back to evolutionary history, but we're got it zoomed in on this group here. So if this trait of body hair exists outside of that clade, outside of it, it's below it, it came before it, that means it's ancestral. It's been handed down through that group from an ancestor that came before them, from this common ancestor right here, that node. Body hair, evolved before that ancestor. So that ancestor got it and it handed it down to all those other lineages. Now, if body hair was down here, then it is derived. It comes later. It didn't in these two groups, the kangaroos and the the platypus and the kangaroo don't have it. So it evolved later in the elephant lineage, so it must be derived. It's not ancestral. It wasn't inherited from an ancestor, the last common ancestor of all three of these. We'll look at more of these. Hopefully it'll start to make more sense. But it is always important to define the group that you're talking about because this question could be clear on my drawing. So if I ask the same question, if I say, okay, body hair, is it ancestral or derived? But I change my group and I say, okay, your clade is now the group that includes the crocodile, the platypus, the kangaroo, and the elephant. So it's a little bit bigger. So now I've got to locate my last common ancestor node, which is this one right there. And now hair comes after that node, meaning it would be inside of my big old circle that represents my clade. And that means it is not ancestral. It is derived. Because for it to be ancestral, it needed to already exist in that last common ancestor. And here it doesn't. It evolves after it. So it must be derived. All right, let's look at a different one. So derived traits then are those that evolved more recently in a particular clade or lineage. So humans, we walk on two legs, but our last common ancestor didn't walk on two legs like we do. That's very much a human thing. So when we have find fossils that have adaptations that show us that they could walk pretty efficiently on two legs, then we know that they're probably part of the hominin or human lineage and probably not part of the non-human ape lineage. So they might be more closely related to chimpanzees if they don't show that. And if they do show that they walked on two legs, then, and we'll get to how skeletons convey that information, but then they're probably more closely related to modern humans. So we can look at here's another cladogram, right? So this bottom part where the tree kind of like ends, that here that goes back far into time, but we just can't draw the whole thing, so we leave it there. And then we can look at the evolution of a fuzzy tail. So this most recent common ancestor of A, B, C, and D, and E, this is the shared node. So this guy represents that shared ancestor right there. He had a naked tail. He did not have a fluffy tail. This fluffy and fuzzy tail evolves after him. So that would be a derived trait. If we're talking about this clade, this entire clade that you see on the screen that includes A, B, C, D, E, and their last common ancestor, which is this naked tail guy, like a naked mole rat, right? That the fuzzy tail evolves after that ancestor, more recently than that ancestor, so it cannot be ancestral. It is derived. So I believe I have another image similar to this on the next screen that we can work with. Oop, I guess I gotta clear my drawings. So ancestral and derived, the point I'm getting at here is that they are relative terms. All traits can be both ancestral and derived depending on like what we're using as the group that we're comparing, that we're focusing on. So on the screen, I have got a clade. It is a clade because with one snip, I've separated this from the rest of the cladogram that exists in my mind that extends backward into time. And I've got a lamprey, a sea bass, an antelope, a bald eagle, and an alligator. Those are the current species. And what we're showing is their ancestral relationship to one another, their evolutionary relationship to one another. So if I ask you for the group that includes antelope, bald eagle, and alligator, are lungs ancestral or derived? For the group that includes antelope, bald eagle, and alligator, that clade, are lungs an ancestral or a derived trait? So the first thing I would do is I would say, okay, I'm looking at this one, and this one, antelope, bald eagle, and alligator. And I would figure out where my last common ancestor is, which is right here, this node right here. Now you can draw your clade if you want, if that helps you to draw the circle, that's fine. Okay. Or you don't have to, or you can just, outline that node and be like, okay, I know that I'm working in reference to that particular node, that last common ancestor. And then we're looking at the trait that we are concerned with, which are lungs. And we are asking ourselves, did lungs evolve before that clade on our timeline? Or did it evolve after that last common ancestor on that timeline? Does it fall within the clade, which would mean it was derived? Or does it fall before the clade, which means that it was or outside of our circle, which means it's ancestral? And in this case, lungs are ancestral. Lungs had already evolved. And then, so this last common ancestor right here of my three groups, my antelope, my bald eagle, and my alligator, They already had lungs developed because lungs had evolved evolutionarily before that last common ancestor, which means it passed on lungs to every single one of these species. So lungs for this group are ancestral, they're inherited. But now, what if I ask you to change your clade that you're looking at to include the lineage of the sea bass? So now we've got sea bass, antelope, bald eagle, alligator. Now this is our last common ancestor node right here. We're still looking at lungs. Now are lungs ancestral or derived? So for lungs to be ancestral, they would have to develop before this last common ancestor node. And in this case, lungs develop after that last common ancestor, which means it must be derived. So that means that the sea bass doesn't have this. It doesn't have this particular trait. It was derived for the antelope, the bald eagle, and the alligator. And then they inherited later. And that was the clade that we looked at here. So you have to, and if you need help with this, let me know, but you kind of have to parse these like a word problem, like what group am I looking at? And then think through, did this trait exist in that last common ancestor of that group, or did it not, or did it evolve later? And that will be the biggest indicator of whether a trait is ancestral or whether it's derived. So the types of traits that exist within primates, we can also classify those. Any trait in any lineage, we can classify those as generalized traits or specialized traits. So we just learned, homologous versus analogous. We learned ancestral versus derived. Now we're going to cover generalized versus specialized. So generalized traits are things that are helpful for a wide variety of behaviors, activities, environments. Things like opposable thumbs. How many, like if you can list a bunch of things that you can do with your thumbs, texting, gaming, thumb wrestle, opening soda cans. If you can name a ton of things, that trait is likely generalized. So if it serves a function, many functions, then it's generalized. Specialized traits are good at one thing. Like they are really awesome at one thing. Now, hooves on a horse, they are excellent at withstanding grinding force for long periods of time over long distances. So they're all great. They're great for running on all fours on a rough ground, but they can't really do much else. If they need to grab on, they're not like sheep hooves. Like if you're thinking mountain goat, for instance, they're not tiny and dexterous like that. They are larger and they are rough. And so if they need to grab onto a wall, if you got to do the wall hang, the American Ninja Warrior wall hang, you can't do that with horse hooves. If you need to open a can, you can't do that with horse hooves. So they're really good at a singular thing because that helps the horse live. So species typically have some specialized and some generalized. Like we have a mix of specialized and generalized traits. So my litmus test here is I normally try to think of like how many specific things that I could name that trait would be good for. Like our brains. Our brains are so good at so many things. So having a large brain is a generalized trait. Specialized traits, if you can only think of like one, maybe two specific things, but normally it's like one thing that a trait is really good for, then it's probably a specialized trait. So what kinds of traits, what specific traits make something a primate? There is no one singular trait that you can say, yep, I can tell right away that's a primate. We all share a suite of characteristics, and if an animal has most to all of these traits, it is probably a primate. And we're going to walk through what these are. I do want to note that I kind of jump around in numbers because as I'm talking about one, I can kind of talk about a different number at the same time. So I've got a numbered list 1 to 12. So I kind of hop around and I won't come around to live in the tropics because that one is pretty straightforward. They live in tropical areas, so we've already covered it. So I don't really flesh out that one. I mostly flesh out the traits that might be unusual to you, that you're not familiar with, or traits that you might not be aware of why they have an adaptive purpose. Starting with number 1, convergent vision. Primates are most distinguishable from many other organisms because our primary sense is actually vision, and we can tell what an animal's primary sense is not primary, but like we can tell the relative reliance on a particular sense by looking at how enlarged that thing is or how small that thing is. So primates that have big snouts, they tend to be really reliant on scent more than vision. But if you have a smaller snout and you have larger eyes, then you tend to be more reliant on vision. So this is just a general like rule of thumb. I'm not saying there are not exceptions. There are absolutely exceptions to pretty much every rule in biology. In primate ecology, but I'm saying it's a good rule of thumb that if something has a really big trait, like really big ears or something, it probably uses them a lot. So we as primates, in general, us specifically, we are heavily reliant on vision. And this is why many of us primates have forward-facing eyes. So what happens when you have forward-facing eyes instead of eyes on the side of your head is that you get an overlapping of the fields of vision from each eye. So if you go to the optometrist, right, and they have you do the cover one eye and read the thing. So if you cover this eye, and you can test it right now, you can see most of the room around you, even though you're covering this eye. So my field of vision is right here. I can't see further than like, if I'm staring straight forward and I'm using my peripherals, I lose it like right here. But, and then if I cover this one, I can also see most of the room. I mean, I'm limited on what I can see over here, but I can see most of the room. So what that happens is that your brain takes both of those fields of vision from each of your eyes and it pops them in overlap. And that's how you get 3D depth perception. That's how I can generally tell how far things are ahead of me, how far I need to reach out to grab them. Now, primates who have eyes on the sides of their heads, they can almost see all the way behind them. So if you're a tiny creature that is worried about predation, it's probably helpful to see behind you. So having the eyes on the side of your head might be helpful for that. But that means you have worse depth perception because you're overlapping fields of vision in the front. Your convergent vision is not very good. So why is this helpful to primates? Well, because it helps us navigate. If we evolved in an arboreal, tree, forested region, like I talked about how our last common ancestor with chimps was arboreal, there must have been enough trees to live an arboreal lifestyle prior to that, right? That depth perception helps us know how far that tree is, how high up to grab. If we're going to launch ourselves from one tree to another, how far is that? How much speed do we need? So depth perception has been very, very helpful to us in the environments that we live in, even including today. You can also see our reliance on our eyeballs, on our sense of vision by our skeletal structure around our eyes. Primates either have a post-orbital bar or they have a post-orbital plate, but they have one or the other. Every primate does. So this exists to protect the sides of the eyes from the muscles that we have. We have chewing muscles that run like around the outside of our head and like attach in the top and the bottom. And these bars are there to protect our eyes from any sort of movement, snapping. I mean, it also protects your eyes from like if you get hit in the side of the head too, right? It's extra protection for them. So in general, both of these exist to protect the eyes. The post-orbital bar is the smaller version of this. It's the less protective version of this. It is a bony ring, like think of a funyun, or like a little strip of belt that runs along the like outside of the eye shape. This gives less protection than the post-orbital plate, which is entirely closed in the back. So it still kind of has that funyun shape to it, like a round shape. But then instead of being able to stick your hand all the way through that like half circle, which is what you can do in a post-orbital bar, it actually has a bony enclosure behind it. So it looks like you could, but you can't. You can't. There's like, you can see on the right-hand side, that light clearly goes through this hole. That is not what it looks like for a post-orbital plate. Light can't go through that bony hole because the hole is closed. There is a plate that is closing the back side of it. So post-orbital plates give us better protection and stability for the eyes than post-orbital bars. Still talking about vision, so you can see how important vision is to us. Moving to trichromatic vision. Many primates have trichromatic vision or the ability to distinguish yellows, reds, blues, and greens. Now you might be asking me, Dr. Bree, you just said trichromatic and we've been learning about prefixes and I know that tri means three, like triangle and tricycle. So why did you just tell me that primates can distinguish between yellows, reds, blues, and greens? That's 4 different colors. The math is not mathing here. Well, the tri part is not actually about the number of colors you can differentiate. It's about the number of photoreceptors you have in your eye. So trichromatic means that these primates have three different photoreceptors in their eye. The blue receptor is conceived of fairly small amount of wavelengths, visible wavelengths. The green and the red are a lot wider in the wavelengths that they can parse and they can see and recognize. And so what happens is if you have these three receptors, you can see pretty much all of the visible wavelength because these other two are wider. So it's just about how much of the visible color wavelengths that each receptor covers. However, people are always saying like, oh, the human eye is so complex. It can see so many colors. Like, how could you make something, how could that not have been by design, intelligent design? But I want to point out that human eyes are actually not the peak. We actually have fairly normal eyes compared to birds, fish, and reptiles who are tetrachromatic, which means they have an additional color, not a color, an additional photoreceptor that we don't have in our eye, and they can see UV wavelengths. We cannot. So no, our eyes are not more complex than other species. They are good for what we need them for. Every species, they're just good enough. But I did want to point out that one thing we've tried to tame in anthropology is human exceptionalism, that we are so exceptionally different from every other animal. We are different. We're distinct. We got a lot of unique things about us, but we're not perfect. And there are things that we are not great at. Our brain, despite being so big and complex, actually makes a lot of mistakes. It's not perfect. It makes a ton of mistakes. So humans are not so exceptional nor so perfect. Now, many mammals are dichromatic, which means that they can only differentiate blues and greens really well. So this is what that kind of vision would look like. On the screen, I've got the trichromat versus the dichromat vision. So dichromatic is probably the ancestral condition because many mammals used to be nocturnal and didn't need to see many other colors. Remember, I was talking about the KPG or the dinosaur extinction, that mammals primarily lived in like dark underground environments. It didn't benefit you to see a bunch of colors. Once we emerged into the daylight after the dinosaurs went extinct, then there became more reason to try and like differentiate colors. So primates today rely on color vision a lot to identify things like fertility. Like many primates will get like a red coloring, females will on their butts, on their booties, to indicate that they are fertile or in estrus, or sometimes to indicate that they're sick. It'll get like more gray in color. To identify ripe fruit, how do you know that grapes are ripe or tomatoes are ripe? You look at the color changes. You feel them, but you also look at the color changes. And to identify other group members, you may have seen baboons that have special face coloring. And so you can tell that somebody's a member of your group and not a weirdo neighbor foreign individual that you should try to compete with or attack, right? So primates use color differentiation for a lot of different things. All right, our visual system uses a ton of caloric energy. So we compensate. So one thing I'd like to emphasize is that if you're really good, if your biology is really good at something, that means that something else has to suffer. You have a finite amount of energy in your body. And if something's sucking up a lot, it's like a storage space on a computer. So if you have something that takes up 80% of your storage space, then you've got to cut back to get everything else to equal the other 20% of storage space. So because primates are so heavily reliant on their vision, they cut back on other senses, particularly for us. We've cut back on our sense of smell a lot for us to have such a wonderful visual system. So compared to other mammals, primates have reduced snouts in general, which means that we have a reduction in reliance on scent. However, within the primate world, we still do see variation in snout size, and by looking at whether that snout is larger or smaller, you can tell already just from looking if a primate is more reliant on vision or more reliant on sense of smell. So because we have this finite energy in our body and we've got to allocate, if we allocate a lot here, we can't allocate a lot here to this sense. That's called an evolutionary trade-off. So your over time evolution is weighting, is it better for this species to be more reliant on scent or smell or hearing? We're not super reliant on hearing, but to weight that and figure out what works out best. Moving now to opposable thumbs and big toes, meaning both of them are opposable. Obviously, our toes are not opposable, but for many other primate species, their toes are opposable, so they can still be grasping. We call these grasping hands and feet. Our feet don't grasp, but again, most of our relatives do. And this ties into trait number 9, which is that primates are highly arboreal, that we tend to live in trees. Well, we don't, but most of our other relatives do. And having these grasping toes, big toes and big thumbs, that this has been helpful for living in a 3D environment when you are highly arboreal and you've got to grab these things. And again, depth perception, our convergent vision helps with this as well. Another generalized trait that is helpful to us is something called pentadactyly. Pent, like pentagon, means 5. So, and dactyl, we've covered this one before, but it means digits. So having 5 digits instead of like 4 or 3 also proved to be helpful to us. And you know, it is possible that people have additional digits. That is a mutation that sometimes occurs. But that doesn't seem to confer any advantage. It seems like 5 is just fine. So having pentadactyly is a generalized trait throughout all of primates that just seems to help us survive in general. So pentadactyly dates all the way back to the earliest four-footed animals. So it is an ancestral trait that we inherited from an earlier mammalian ancestor. So again, everybody has opposable thumbs and toes except for us. Our toes just they serve a different purpose, and we'll get there. But this is a derived trait that appeared in the earliest primates. So the mammals didn't have this. The group Mammalia didn't have this. This evolved later in our lineage of primates, and it probably appeared around 55 million years ago. That's how long this thing has been around because it's been so helpful. We also, thankfully, have nails instead of claws or hooves, so our nails are quite flat. And I have some pictures on the screen to show you the difference between a nail and a claw. A nail lays over the top of the skin, the epidermis here, so it lays over the top, and it continually grows, right? Now, claws are different because claws, they don't just lay on the top of the skin, they actually connect to the bone. And so when people declaw cats, they're actually amputating part of the digit itself, part of the bone structure of the cat, which is why there is such pushback against declawing because you're basically, yeah, you're amputating a part of it. It'd be like amputating that's your finger. But nails, I want you to consider for a second, why might those be beneficial as opposed to claws for primates that live in a highly arboreal environment? Okay, I'm gonna pretend you tried to come up with something in your head. There's a couple of reasons. One, look at those claws. Even when those claws are retracted, right? They're still out a little bit. Now, what happens if you're grabbing a branch and that claw is sticking out a little bit? That's gonna be a little bit hard for you to grab on, have a really good grip on. Second, what happens if your fingernail gets ripped off? It grows back, right? Well, if this gets ripped off with the bone attached to it, it doesn't grow back. So what else? Later, we're going to use tools. Using tools requires fine dexterity with your fingers, with your digits, and having claws that are always kind of out would mean that we don't have such a fine precision grip with our fingers. So there are a number of reasons why having these flat nails that we can clip off or whatever, they seem to be beneficial to our particular way of life. Moving now to number 8, tactile pads. Tactile pads are the soft, sensitive skin at your fingertips. Like think about where your fingerprints are located. I'm talking about that area of your digits. Now, some primates have a prehensile tail, meaning that they can wrap it around things and it can hold their weight. Some of them have a tactile pad on the underside too. And what this is relating to our sense of touch. Like when we touch things with the tips of our fingers, our brain receives feedback about that thing that we're touching. So if I touch something with my fingertips and it's cold, I know something about that thing. If I touch something with my fingertip and I know it's hot, then I know something about that thing. I'm gaining information. But think about handling fruit, right? We already talked about how color vision is helpful to that. Well, how can these little finger pads, this fine sense of touch, how can that also help you when you're thinking about eating fruits or vegetables? Well, if you go to the store and you're buying an avocado, how do you know if that avocado is ripe or not? You feel it. can't tell from the outside. So if you feel the avocado and it's hard as a rock, you know it's not ripe, right? But if you squeeze it and it just mushes all the way down under your fingertips and you know it's too ripe, you're looking for that Goldilocks avocado, that middle of the road if you want to use it today at least, right? So we use that fine sense of touch. It's not just about pressure, it is actually the feedback of the how much give and take, and also I was talking about temperature, right? It's about all of those things. Your brain is receiving feedback on all of those things. Beyond that, a fine sense of touch is helpful in primates specifically, not just because of what we eat, but because of how social we are as creatures. And one way that we reinforce our bonds with other individuals is through touch. So if you ever liked somebody brushing your hair in school or touching your back or whatever, and that was always very calming to me. It was, I don't know, it just felt like nice to have somebody care about me. Well, this is the same thing with primates. They will pick nits out of one another's fur because A, you get a yummy snack, but two, having that fine sense of touch from another individual, it enhances these bonds. It can even help resolve conflicts. It can show deference. So if a primate got into an aggressive thing with another primate and he's trying to say, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I realize you're the alpha and I'm not the alpha," he'll groom the other one, the one that was dominant, just to show, "Hey, I get it. I'm in line now. I'm the submissive one." Moving now to large brains. So on average, primates have brains that are 2 times as big as their body size compared to other mammals. And this is because we've got big old visual centers in our brain too, because we are so reliant on vision. So animals with large brains usually have what are called extended life history patterns. And life history is the pace at which an organism grows, reproduces, and ages. So, by long extended life history, I mean that all of those things take a lot longer to occur in primates than they do in other species. But there's also variation within primates themselves compared to other animals that are of a similar body size, because body size does correlate with life history. So, animals that are smaller tend to have a shorter life history, and individuals that are bigger, organisms that are bigger, tend to have a longer life history, a slower one. That compared to animals of a similar body size, primates grow and develop more slowly, have fewer offspring per pregnancy, reproduce less often, and live longer. But what this means is that we heavily invest in each of those offspring to make sure that they do make it to survival. For the primates themselves, what I want to show you is this. I know this is blurry. I'm so sorry, but I can't find a better one. I've really got to put some time to dedicating to find a better graph. But this shows the different components of the life history system within 5 different primates. So first we've got the lemur, then the macaque, then the gibbon, the chimp, and the human. And these are arranged from left to right in order of size. So a lemur is much smaller than a human, a chimp is smaller than a human, a gibbon smaller than a chimp, that kind of thing. So from left to right, we're going from smaller to larger in size. So we would expect a life history to get longer and longer as we go up in size. But I do want to point out a couple of other things that are interesting about this graph and the stages within them. So number one, you can see that the smaller animals, that they tend to have a fewer weeks gestation. So humans, it normally takes about 40 weeks to gestate a fetus to viability, to birth. I mean, it'll be viable before that, but generally it takes about 40 weeks to cook up an offspring. But the smaller the animal, the less time it takes here. So lemur is much shorter than that. You'll also notice that humans, which are all the way over here on the right-hand side, we have this part of our life history called childhood, and that seems to be fairly unique to humans. Childhood is a point where you are super dependent on your parent, right? And they have got to actively teach you how to be an organism that lives in a society. I mean, many of these other species kind of have a society, but ours is very complex, which requires a lot of time to figure out how to do things. So childhood and juvenile and adolescence, those are all fairly unique to humans because we've got an extended period of dependency before we can go live off on our own. All these other animals, they're not keeping their kids till they're 18. Heck no, they're kicking them out as soon as they can. Then we've got adult. That's a stage that all of these have. That means sexually mature. And then we've got, for humans, we've got post-reproduction. And this is a fairly strange one in the animal world because many animals, I would say a vast majority of animals, do not live past their reproductive potential. And humans can live far past their reproductive potential. And our hypothesis on why this occurs in humans is that I think it's called the grandmother hypothesis, but it's because of alloparenting. So the current hypothesis is that once you're done reproducing, that humans now help the next generation, like their kids, care for their grandkids and their great grandkids. So they help rear offspring after they can no longer have their own offspring. So they are still investing in offspring, it's just not their own. And the hypothesis is that that was so beneficial to the survival and eventual fitness of these individuals that we just kept living longer because it was so helpful. So with those extended life histories, it is interesting to note that most primates only have one offspring at a time. Some particular species, it is rare, but some species tend to have twins. Most of us have one offspring at a time, but I pointed out that that gestation length varies. How long that baby's got to stay in there to cook, to be ready to come out into the world, that varies. Some produce offspring about every 6 months. Can you imagine having a baby every 6 months? Woo-wee. However, let's look down at the orangutan. The orangutan, I believe, oh, it is the slowest reproducing animal on the entire planet. It has an offspring about every 7 to 9 years. 7 to 9. And this is why orangutans, this cutie on the screen is an orangutan, baby orangutan, but orangutans, their habitat is being destroyed by things like palm oil forcing. So I try to be really good about eliminating palm oil from products that I buy because the orangutan is suffering so much from the environmental degradation associated with it. But once you start looking for palm oil, you will find that it is in freaking everything. It isn't, I don't know why it is in so many things, but it is in so many things. But orangutans, they find it very hard to regrow populations that have been hurt by environmental deforestation because they reproduce so slowly. So they can't rebuild their population, so they really need to be protected. All right, so that's the primate suite of traits. We are going to talk about some interesting things with the teeth and the bones now that tell us about how the environment and the diet of certain species matches how they develop trait-wise. So we can learn a lot about an animal from its teeth because unlike us, most animals don't have silverware. So they rely on their teeth to process their food, which is affected by their evolutionary history. So all primates are called heterodonts. Hetero means different. That prefix means different. You should remember that from our unit on genetics because we talked about heterozygous and hetero means different. And then dont, if you think about the orthodontist, that refers to teeth. So what those two things put together means is that we have different kinds of teeth in our mouth that all serve different purposes. Our incisors, the flat teeth at the front of your mouth, you've got 4 on the bottom and 4 on the top, or most people typically do. Those are great for slicing through things. Those are the first things that hit an apple, right? You slice through the outside of a skin of an apple with your incisors. They're wonderful for slicing. Your premolars and your molars, those are towards the back, the middle to back of your mouth on both the top and the bottom. Those are good for grinding things down. So if you're chewing gum, you know, put it in the back, and that's because these are the strongest teeth that you have back here. And canines, in most species except for us, canines are often for weapons. So the bigger the canines in a species, the more that it likely has to use those for intimidation or for protection. We don't do that. We have technology and we have invented weapons, so our teeth no longer need to be our weapons. So the size of canines across species can be quite sexually dimorphic, by which I mean, if you look at the trait in males versus females, there tends to be a difference in size. Most of the time, males tend to have larger canines than females, and not by a little, but by a lot. And this is because they are using them to either intimidate rivals or compete with rivals for access to mates. Some primates have what's called a honing complex in their teeth. And if you've ever seen somebody sharpen a knife using like an electric knife sharpener, or even using the handheld ones, it's like a metal rod that you run the knife against. This is basically what a honing complex is in the primate's teeth. So the canine is so large that when it slots into the lower jaw, so the big canines tend to be on the top, the lower ones down here in the mandible, the lower jaw, you can see they're a bit smaller. It's because you can't fit 2 giant canines into the mouth. Like they would come out across your lips, and that doesn't really work well logistically. So the top ones tend to be pretty big. The bottom ones can be large, but they'll definitely be to a degree smaller. So as they slot in next to one another, the edges, they rub against each other's edges and they naturally sharpen and hone the points of those teeth. That is why it's called a honing complex. So it's like putting a knife sharpener. So every time you open and close your mouth, it's like sharpening your teeth a little bit. The honing complex is distinct from, but related to, the diastema. The diastema is the actual space in the lower jaw where that top canine sits. The space in the lower jaw is called the diastema. The diastema, we don't have a diastema in us because we don't have a big old top canine, so we don't have a diastema. Many primates who have these big old canines, they have a diastema, that space in the lower jaw. Now the whole thing, the teeth hitting against each other and sharpening, that whole thing is called the honing complex. The actual space in the jaw, in the bone, is the diastema. So they are related. Neither of them would exist if there was a small canine, but they are distinct elements of the mouth. In scientific perspectives, to be able to describe quickly what kinds of teeth people or individuals, organisms, species have in their mouths, we use something called a dental formula. It is a numerical shorthand that is always occurs in the exact same order. It works from the front of the mouth to the back of the mouth, and it only describes one quadrant. So if you remember from math, a quadrant, and quad means four, right? So imagine you took your mouth and you divided it into four. You would have two halves on the upper and two halves on the lower. The dental formula only looks at one of those quadrants. It works from incisors to molars for 1/4 of the mouth. So here, I'll show you how you'll write it. It's going to be, all right, so here's our half. We're looking at this picture. We work from there to there. So we start with incisors. Incisors are the front teeth, so you do those first. So in one quadrant, if you divided your lower jaw in half, you would have two incisors on the right half and two on the left half. So the first number we would put is 2. And then we're going to put a colon, and then we're going to describe how many canines we have. How many canines in one quadrant, 1/4 of your mouth? You should have one. Now, you as an individual, it's possible you could have bonus teeth. So your number might be different, but we're talking about species in general. Next, we're going to have premolars. Premolars, I've got 2 in a single quadrant of the mouth, which means you have 4 on the bottom and 4 on the top. So our next number is 2. Then we've got molars. Now, this is where it would vary. If we were looking at person to person, it would vary here. So for instance, I actually was born without one of my wisdom teeth already. So if I was talking about that specific quadrant of my mouth, it would say 2 here because I only have 2 molars there. But in general, for our species, most people are born with 3 molars. And so that would be a 3 there. So this is a human jaw, in fact. So our dental formula is 2, 1, 2, 3. Now, sometimes primates, other primates, not us, they've got a different number of, different numbers of teeth on the top and the bottom. And if that happens, we actually show it like a fraction. So let's say that this formula, 2, 1, 2, 3, is going to be the denominator. That describes their lower jaw because that's what we're looking at here in the image. But let's say in their upper jaw, they only have 1 premolar in whatever mysterious species we're talking about. They only have 1 premolar. So then their top, everything would stay the same except for our premolar number, which is this third one. So because the top, they have 1 premolar instead of 2, you would put a 1 there. So if the top and the bottom are different, this is how you would represent it. If the top and the bottom are the same, you could just put the same thing on the top and the bottom, but I would say most of us just write this singular 1 formula. For this class, I'm only going to be asking you to write 1 formula. So the 2, 1, 2, 3, I would give you 1 quadrant of the mouth, and you can just assume they're all the same. Now we're going to look at how teeth reflect particular diets, and we're going to start with frugivores. If you had to guess what the primary thing that a frugivore eats is, what would you guess? What does it sound like? Fruit, right? And you would be correct. Now, I do want to preface this by saying we're going to go through 3 different dietary types, but every single primate supplements with something else. So the primary dietary type of frugivore means that they prefer And they mostly do eat fruit, but if there's an insect, they'll eat it. If they have to eat grass, they probably could eat it. So every primate tends to supplement with something else, but we just classify them based on what their major dietary consumption is. So in this case, frugivores have a diet that mostly consists of fruit. Now, something we have to talk about is actually the biology of fruit. Like, why does fruit exist? What is its purpose? Plants grow fruit as the mechanism by which to disperse their seeds. So when a plant or when a fruit gets sweet, is ripe, that means the seeds are ready for dispersal. So in some plants that will if nothing's around to eat them, they will fall to the ground, the fruit itself will decompose, and the seeds will grow where they are, or they won't grow. They'll do one or the other. Or they grow or they won't, but they won't really move anywhere. But the goal is you want genetic diversity. You don't want your seeds just reproducing. You don't want your apple tree to reproduce with the offspring of the same apple tree. That's how you get mutants. So you want your fruit to get dispersed. How do you do that? You get something to eat it, digest the fruit, poop the seeds out later because the poop is going to be fertilizer, and the seeds are going to be in a new place where there will hopefully be some genetic diversity in those offspring later, by being around other plants of similar variety. So frugivores don't really need a lot of specialized teeth because plants don't want to make it too hard to eat their fruit, or primates or any other animal won't eat it and disperse their seeds. So they tend to have two things. One, frugivores tend to have large incisors. You can see this image on the screen. Those are some big old incisors, way bigger than ours, very flat, scoopy-like. And those are for slicing through fruit skin. That's helpful for a frugivore. And two, they have things called bunodont molars. These are molars in the back that tend to be pretty flat. They've got kind of rounded, low cusps, and they're just for mushing up fruit. They're not rough. They're not really tall. Fruit, if it's ripe, is soft. So their molars don't have to look any different than, they don't have to have like a distinct specialized trait with their molars, because their molars are just mushing up things like, if you think about plum or orange, you don't need to work that hard to mush it up to swallow it, right? So frugivores don't tend to have a lot of specialized things in their mouth. Now, insectivores. Insectivores mostly eat insects. Insects are high in protein, but you would have to eat a lot of them to get enough like caloric density to maintain a big body size. So insectivores tend to be some of the tiniest primates that we see, and they do need specialized teeth. You can tell that these teeth look a lot different from my frugivore teeth right here. They're very pointy in insectivores, and that is because they need these sharp, pointy molars to be able to break through the exoskeleton of primates. So think about, if you step on a cockroach, that crunch on the outside, yeah, that's their exoskeleton. So they need to be able to get through that to get to all the good stuff inside. So these pointy molars, you'll notice that there tends to be one big cusp and one little smaller pointy cusp. And that is because I'm going to talk about some other sharp teeth and sharp molars in a second. And I just want to make it clear how they're different. So the insectivore molars tend to have one with a huge point and one with a smaller point on there. But you can see their other teeth in the front are fairly pointy as well. So that's a key thing. Insectivores tend to be small in size with very pointy teeth. Moving now to folivores. Folivores, think of the word foliage, that's plants. So they tend to eat a diet that is very, very heavily plant-based. Again, they will supplement with other things. Fruit doesn't take a lot of specialized teeth, so they could eat fruit. They can eat insects. Now, coming back to the plant thing. Plants want their fruit to be eaten. They do not want their leaves to be eaten because the leaves are key to their to their lifestyle. They can't, if they don't have leaves, then they can't photosynthesize and they can't live. So they need these leaves and they don't want them to be eaten. As a result, a lot of plants have these toxins that, they don't kill you, but they make the plant taste like really bitter. And that's the plant's defense mechanism, because most animals don't want to taste the bitterness. But for folivores, it doesn't deter them. So they eat the leaves anyway. Now, to be able to break down those cellulose filled leaves, remember I showed you what a plant cell looked like, very starchy. I showed you that in a different lecture. To break through that, to neutralize the toxins and to get nutrients out of that plant into the body, Primates that are folivores need super complex dietary tracts. So their GI system needs to be very big. This means that they need a large body. So whereas our insectivores need to be tiny because they can't eat enough to eat enough like caloric density to maintain a big body weight, folivores, they have to have a huge digestive tract to be very efficient at eating and digesting those leaves. So they have larger bodies. So think gorillas. Gorillas are folivores. Folivore teeth need to be adapted to get through that starchy texture. Think about celery, right? So they need molars that have really pointy cusps on them. They stick the leaves back there and they rip them. They basically rip them and they shred them with those back teeth. So molars with shearing crests, that's what we call them. Those are the kinds of molars that folivores have. They don't really use their incisors so much. Imagine trying to put a leaf in the front of your teeth and like pull it into smaller pieces. That's not going to work very well with your incisors. So on the screen, I have a comparison between insectivore teeth and folivore teeth. You can see that they're both, these are molars. They're both very pointy, but that the insectivore one is definitely pointier than the folivore one. So just a comparison, insectivores, small body size, very, very pointy teeth. Folivores have pointy teeth, but less so than insectivores, and big body. So really it's the body size that helps you narrow it down here. We talked about teeth, how teeth reflect diet. Let's talk about how skeletal morphology reflects locomotion. There are four main types of locomotion in primates. The first one is called vertical clinging and leaping, or VCL for short. And animals that move this way usually have very long legs. This is because they need to leap off the tree. They must propel themselves forward. That's very hard to do if your legs are short, so having long legs helps the propellant factor. They have long fingers and toes for grasping onto branches as they're going from one to the next. And they have fairly small bodies because lugging around a big body and shooting that body off a tree and then catching yourself on another tree would be very, very hard to do with this particular type of locomotion. So longer legs and arms, so it's always about a ratio, upper limb to lower limb. Lower limb is very dominant here. Long fingers and toes for grasping, and smaller bodies to make it easier to launch oneself from tree A to tree B. Moving on to the next type of locomotion, that is quadrupedalism, and that prefix of quad, remember, means four. It is the most common form of locomotion in all of the primates. Obviously, we don't do it. I mean, unless you're talking about when we're babies, but it is the most common form. But we typically break this down into two different kinds of locomotion, which is arboreal quadrupedalism, means walking on all fours in the trees, or terrestrial quadrupedalism, which is walking on all fours but on the land. So for quadrupeds in general, arms and legs tend to be close in length, like almost identical in length. But terrestrial quadrupeds, those ones that walk on the ground, actually tend to have slightly longer arms. And the reason for this is that they like to keep their chest a little bit upright, so they can look ahead and see where they're going. For arboreal quadrupeds, this doesn't seem to be quite a concern. So both of them relatively equal in length, but arboreal quadrupeds will be almost identical in length, and terrestrial quadrupeds will have just a little bit longer arms. Some other skeletal differences here. Arboreal quadrupeds have a tail that helps them it helps them balance. So imagine how like when you start to lose, if you trip over something or you're slipping on something on the ground, you shoot your arms out to like counterbalance your weight to help you stabilize. It's the same thing with their tail. Their tail helps them counterbalance their weight and to balance on branches. Terrestrial quadrupeds, they don't have to worry about falling off a branch, so they don't have really a tail. So they have little to no tail at all. Arboreal quadrupeds in general tend to have shorter limbs. So both of them, again, the ratio of limb length of upper limbs, the arms, to the lower limbs, the legs, fairly equal. But if you just look at overall the length of the limbs between terrestrial and arboreal quadrupeds tend to have slightly shorter arms and legs, total arms and legs. And you might ask, like, why would that be beneficial? We have to think about balance. So if you have shorter arms and legs, your center of gravity, your body mass is going to be closer to the branch, and this actually helps with stability. So imagine you're walking, like if you're walking on stilts, that's a bit hard. That takes some talent to learn, right? And that so elongation of the limbs makes balance a harder thing to do. So having shorter limbs puts your body weight closer to the thing you're balancing on, which in this case is the branch. So that is helpful for arboreal quadrupeds to have shorter arms and legs. It makes it easier for them to run really, really quickly. It'd be harder to do that if you had longer arms and legs because your weight would go one way or the other more likely. So I've got an image of two different skeletal renderings on the screen, and the one on the left's got a very long tail, and the one on the right has a shorter tail. That should be enough of you for you to guess which one is the terrestrial quadruped and which one is the arboreal quadruped, because arboreal quadrupeds tend to have a longer tail for bounce. So the one on the left will be our arboreal quadruped. Okay, locomotion type number three is brachiation. I'd like to describe this one as swinging on the monkey bars because that's something that most of us have done in our lives, or at least seen kids or seen other people do. So that is what this type of locomotion looks like, swinging branch to branch. So as you might imagine, brachiators definitely need long arms. So the way that we use our legs is the primary driver of getting to point A to point B, right? I'm not using my arms, I'm swinging my legs. But in this example, they're swinging their arms. So the longer your arms are, the more momentum you can get and the more distance you can cover. So these guys tend to have very short legs compared to their arms, or you can think of it the converse. They have very long arms compared to their legs. They also have flexible shoulders and wrists, so we've got a lot of mobility there, but they've got even more mobility in their shoulders to be able to rotate and grab branches in particular. Locations in relation to themselves. They tend to have a short lower back and no tail. So part of this is trying to decrease the amount of weight that they're carrying around. You can move faster in this type of locomotion if you have less weight. So having tiny legs and a low back decreases the amount of weight that you're swinging around with you. And the no tail thing is also, yeah, it decreases weight a little bit, but they also just don't need it. They don't need it for the way that they're moving. It is also possible, and I won't ask you questions about this, but just to check all my boxes here. Some animals, some primates are also semi-brachiators, meaning that they brachiate and then they'll do quadrupedal. They'll be like arboreal quadrupeds, and then they'll brachiate and then arboreal quadrupedalism. So they will look a little bit different. They will have that tail and they will have arms and legs about the same. So it is possible, like if I say a primate is a brachiator, it doesn't mean they are like only brachiating, right? Because chimps are not bipedal like we are. They can walk on two legs, but they are not they're not habitual bipeds. They're not obligate bipeds like we are. So primates will do what they got to do. They'll intermix these things, but their skeletal shape, their morphology tells us which one they use the most. So they are adapted to the one that they use the most, and they might have to fall into another one for a little bit, but they are adapted for one of these umbrella terms. Now we have gone through three different modes of locomotion. We are missing one, and it is the one that you do and I do. And what is that mode of locomotion? Bipedalism. And we actually have quite a range of traits that make us awesome at walking bipedally, but we're going to address those more in depth later. So right now, I just want you to know that we have really long legs compared to our arms. Remember, we swing them like pendulums. So having long legs, very beneficial. And we don't have an opposable toe. And the reason for that is that your foot that uses your big toe as part of to create this like solid platform that you push and propel yourself forward. We will come back to these traits when we start getting into hominins, because I will tell you specifically I think there's not like 7 or 9 traits that we cover, but I will tell you what the specific purpose is for each one and its benefit, and sometimes its consequences, because we can't be great at everything. All right, so I'm going to end this lecture by taking us through a couple of classifications and allowing you to meet some primates. Depending on who teaches this course, some teachers, some professors will take you through every single one of these and they will get really in depth. I don't really find that beneficial to the scope of this class because then you're not really understanding the relationship to humans, and I really think that's what should be central. So this is me exhibiting a little bit of my particular perspective here, but I am going to limit how many branches of this that we go through. But we are looking at a cladogram and we can see that there are different levels to the relationships. So there's the biggest one is order, and that's all of primates. Primate is an order. Then under suborder, we split those off into two groups, into strepsirrhines or strepsirrhini and haplorrhines or haplorrhini. Below that, we've got infraorder, and then superfamily, and then specific species. I don't need you to memorize this. I just wanted to orient you to just kind of know where we're at and there are different levels. So when I say strepsirrhine or haplorrhine, all primates are one or the other. And then when I go down to the next level, that'll be a smaller group of primates, and then the next level will be a smaller group of primates, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about the two suborders first, strepsirrhines, or the actual name of the suborder is strepsirrhini, but and a primate that is part of that suborder is called a strepsirrhine. So strepsirrhine and haplorrhine are going to be the terms that I'm using. This split back here occurred about 70 to 80 million years ago, so a very, very long time ago. Strepsirrhines, this is going to be the suborder that includes lemurs, lorises, and galgos. They have two key traits. So if you see these two traits, then you know you're looking at a strepsirrhine. These are derived traits, so they do not exist in the haplorrhine group. And that is a grooming claw, sometimes called the toilet claw, because it is for hygienic purposes. It is on the second digit of each foot, and it is used to rake through the fur for hygienic practices, like basically think of it like a comb, right? And that's what the teeth are for too. This dental comb, this is the same thing. It also helps with grooming. So very much think about brushing your hair, getting stuff out of your fur. That's what these are for. So toilet claws up top. It is only on one of the digits per hand. And then this tooth comb is another thing that is used for grooming through fur. So those are two key traits of the strepsirrhines. Other things we know about strepsirrhines is that they rely on non-visual senses more than haplorrhines, and they have things that in their biology that tell us this, that reflect this difference in the senses. So strepsirrhines have wet noses like dogs or cats. This is called a rhinarium. This rhinarium is this wet nose on the front. Our nose is dry unless you're sweaty, which, you know, it's summer, so okay, that's fine, but it's not naturally wet like the rhinarium trait. Plus, they have longer snouts. And I told you if an animal has a longer snout, it means that they probably are channeling more of their caloric energy and are more reliant on that sense of smell than any other sense of smell, like their eyes. So they do rely on scent a lot. They use one of their primary forms of communication is something called scent marking. In this image I just put on the screen, I am showing you the glory of scent marking in lemurs. So they have these specialized glands that they can rub on things like tree branches, and those glands are often on their wrists or near their butts. And they can do this to mark territory or indicate a breeding status. So if females are ready to breed, they will send out, it's kind of like Tinder, right? They're sending out a message, hey, come find me, boys, I'm ready, or what have you. And then they can also urinate on things to mark their territory. So very delightful, but that is why their snouts are so big, because they need a lot of basically receptors kind of to differentiate all these different kinds of scents. We're not very good at that. Strepsirrhines, because they are super reliant on scent, they are less reliant on vision, so they have less convergent vision than haplorrhines. They don't need that overlapping field of vision. Strepsirrhines all have post-orbital bars, which is another thing that tells us that they are not super reliant on their vision. Remember that the post-orbital plate is the more protective version. We have, as we are haplorrhines, we have this full post-orbital closure. So this is not us. We are not strepsirrhines. I mean, you can tell because we don't have a rhinarium, we don't have a big snout. So all strepsirrhines have what's called a tapetum lucidum. And this is a reflective layer on the back of your eye, and the goal is to reflect light. And what this does is if you have more reflective surfaces inside of your eye, it allows you to use what little light exists and amplify it. So this enhances their ability to see in low light conditions, which should indicate to you what kind of lifestyle they live, which is a nocturnal one most of the time. So if an animal has this, like a cat and a dog, and there are different degrees of this, right? Like not all are reflective to the same degree. So cats and dogs have this too, which is what causes their eyes to look like yellow or I don't know what causes the red eye look, but it's the yellow eye when you take a picture with flash, like at night or whatever. That is what you're seeing in cats and dogs. So they are really good at seeing at night, much better than us. We see horribly at night. We do not have this feature. All right, so strepsirrhines behaviorally are very interesting. They tend to be solitary and travel by themselves. Most of them are nocturnal, like I mentioned. That's why they have that reflective layer on the backs of their eyes. They tend to be highly arboreal and small. Most of them are insectivores or frugivores, and they are fantastic at leaping. All but one vertical clinger and leaper in the primate world belong to this particular suborder. One very, very interesting strepsirrhine I wanted to introduce you to is the eye. You may have heard of the eye. The eye is very ugly by all accounts. But it's fairly small, but the eye has a very specialized trait. It is a very, very long middle finger, and it uses that middle finger to tap on trees and locate insects. Like it uses kind of like echolocation. It hears the sounds and it locates insects inside of trees, and then it can use that long claw or that long finger with that long nail, and it can get the insects out with it. So it can stab it and bring it out of the hole. So this is a very specialized trait. It's not awesome at a lot of things, but it is very good at doing the thing that it does, which is helping the to find insects to munch upon. All right, moving to the other suborder, to haplorrhini, or haplorrhines. Haplorrhines are the member of this suborder. This is just the opposite. We're going the opposite way of strepsirrhines. We've got really good vision, and we are very reliant on that vision. We've got full post-orbital closure or post-orbital plate around our eyes, which means that we are very reliant on our convergent vision. We have a dry nose and no snout, no rhinarium, so we are not reliant on our smell very much. And most of us don't have that reflective layer. We are diurnal, which means we are awake during the day. We also tend to have bigger brains compared to our body size than strepsirrhines, which means that you will see a lot of tool use in this particular suborder. Now, haplorrhines, our dietary system is a bit different. No one in the haplorrhines tends to be an insectivore because we are larger in size. So most of the dietary patterns that we see are folivorous and frugivorous. Haplorrhines, again, tend to be larger than strepsirrhines, and that large body size is reflected in the patterns of locomotion. When you are larger in size, you cannot be a vertical clinger and leaper, really. So most of us in the haplorrhine group, we are quadrupedal. Most groups here in the suborder of haplorrhines tend to show moderate to high sexual dimorphism, whereas most of the strepsirrhines tend to be closer to one another in size. What I mean is that haplorrhines, the males tend to be larger and the females tend to be smaller. Males tend to have bigger canines, females tend to have smaller canines. And whereas the strepsirrhines tend to be solitary creatures, most of us haplorrhines live in groups. We're more social. Moving down now from suborder to infraorder, we've got tarsiforms, platyrrhini, and catarrhini. We are going to skip over tarsiforms for now, even though they're weirdos and I love them. They are a smaller group, and I want to just make sure that we concentrate on the larger groups, which are platyrrhines and catarrhines, or platyrrhini and catarrhini. We'll start with platyrrhines. Platyrrhines are very diverse in what they look like because they are the only non-human primates in Central and South America. So they had a wonderful, huge environment they were able to rapidly diversify and fill with a lack of competition. So they look pretty diverse. Platyrrhines specifically get their name from their nose shape. The prefix platy means flat or flattened. And this rhini or rhini, I'm not sure how you would pronounce it by itself, but it refers to the nose. If you think of words like rhinarium, which we learned earlier in this lecture, or rhinoplasty, which is the scientific name for a nose job or nose plastic surgery, or nose surgery in general, that you put those two things together, it means flat nose. So platyrrhines, the morphology and the shape of their nose is that their noses are very wide, their nostrils are far apart, and their nostrils point outwards rather than pointing downwards. Our nostrils are close together and point downwards. So this is a very quick indicator that we are not a member of this group. We are actually catarrhines, and we will get to us shortly. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about platyrrhines. Platyrrhines are smaller than catarrhines. They are less sexually dimorphic, and they have a dental formula that is normally 2, 1, 3, 3. That, remember, is incisors, canine, premolars, molars. So humans are 2, 1, 2, 3. 2, 1, 2, 3. We have 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, 3 molars. That means that platyrrhines, they have 1 more premolar than we do. They are highly arboreal, and they have a very high instance of what is called polymorphic color vision. This is interesting to me because it kind of breaks some of our rules. So there are particular genes that enable individuals to distinguish between reds and yellows, blues, and greens. We talked about that when we talked about dichromats and trichromats, right? Well, those genes happen to lie on the X chromosome. Now, what happens is that means that males can only be dichromatic because they can never get that second X that has the rest of the genes that relate to color vision. So females, it is possible that they don't get that second X that fills in the rest of the gaps. They can be dichromatic or they can be trichromatic, but males only get one shot, which means that without both X's, you can't possibly be trichromatic. So males, sucks for them. They only get to be dichromats. They can only see blues and greens. So that's the same species. Within this same species, some of them have trichromatic vision, some of them have dichromatic vision. That is called polymorphic color vision. That within the same group, we've got 2 variations on color vision. Not everyone in the species sees color the same way. Catarrhines include monkeys of Africa, Asia, and apes, including us humans. We are part of this group. We have a distinct nose shape. It is teardrop. Our nostrils are like teardrop shaped, and they point down, and they are very, very close together. So platyrrhines, remember their nostrils are pretty far apart. Ours in catarrhines tend to be teardrop shaped and point downwards and be very, very close together. You can tell we are catarrhines because we match the dental formula. We are 2, 1, 2, 3. We've got 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, 3 molars. We are the largest and most sexually dimorphic group of all of the primates. We have some of the biggest bodied primates. Not us, right? We are not the ones with the biggest bodies. Have you ever seen a gorilla? They're huge. Because of our big body size, we are a group that tends to be highly terrestrial. We don't see any need to be swinging our bodies through the trees or vertical clinging and leaping. We all tend to be diurnal, and we don't have this polymorphic color vision. Both males and females of all species in this group tend to be trichromatic. So showing you the nose here, platyrrhine nose kind of points outwards, the nostrils far apart. Catarrhine nose, nostrils point down and very, very close together. All right, we are moving down another level we went from infraorder, now we're going to the superfamily. We are not going to worry about Cercopithecoidea. We are going to worry about hominoidea because we are part of that group and we are ultimately concerned with humans, right? So the book that I use that goes along with this, the Explorations, that's where I source my content. It's an open access resource. It does go over superfamily traits. I'm not really gonna go, I don't want to overwhelm you, and I already feel like it is still kind of overwhelming. So we're just gonna go over the things most closely related to us. So within the superfamily of Hominoidea, we have a couple of genuses that I want to highlight. The first one is the genus Pongo, and the only species currently that is around today that exists in the genus Pongo are orangutans. They are found in Southeast Asia. They eat a ton of fruit. They are highly frugivorous, but they will supplement, like I told you all primates do, with leaves and bark if they have to. They don't want to. That doesn't taste as good as fruit, but if they need to survive, they will. They are the only solitary and diurnal species, so very interesting, pretty funky, pretty unique. Now, another couple of unique things about primates. One, they are highly sexually dimorphic. On the screen on the left, I'm showing you a male. He has these big cheek phalanges, so like big flat cheek pouches, I guess. And he has this really, really long enlarged throat sac and long, shaggy fur. On the right, you see a female. She doesn't have cheek flanges. She does have a longer coat, but it's not the same level as the males, and she does not have that big old throat sac. So males tend to be also about 2 times the size of females, double the size. Can you imagine if males in our species were double the size of females? I couldn't even imagine. So the skulls of male orangutans, they feature something that is called a sagittal crest. And it's actually something we're going to meet when we talk about hominins in a future unit. But the sagittal crest is basically this bony mohawk that runs along the top of the skull. And that is an attachment point for chewing muscles. And this will appear on skulls that are large enough to show it, but it's normally really helpful for chewing hard food. So if your chewing muscles are really, really big, they normally need a really strong anchor point, and this is their anchor point. And so having these big old chewing muscles can help them eat their fallback foods, which are the foods they don't really like to eat, like the bark and stuff of trees, but they have to eat in order to survive. So this is only typically seen on the skulls of male orangutans, and I'm not quite clear on why that is. It might have just been beneficial for males to be able to provide for females by like maybe pulling the bark off of the tree themselves. But regardless, this sagittal crest is an important feature to know and identify, and we will come back to it. We won't leave it, but I just want to bring it up now because it is cool, and we will see it in hominins in our ancestral lineage. Another unique feature of orangutan biology is something called male bimaturism. And what this means is that mature males of a species typically all look the same, meaning they have the same kind of features that indicate their sexual maturity. But in orangutans, it is totally possible to have mature males that look totally different. So both of the images on the screen here, you are seeing males, but one of them has those big old cheek flanges and that huge throat sac, and the other one doesn't, but they are both sexually mature males. Why is this? Well, male orangutans are known to delay maturation until one of the more dominant flanged males leaves or dies. But there's a reason for this, because if you think about it, like from a fitness perspective, why would that male orangutan want to not be able to mate? It's just waiting around for the dominant male to leave or die. That's a lot of your good quality mating years to get rid of, to forego. So there is another reason why this occurs. But first, males that do delay their maturation because there's like a dominant male around, they're basically receiving like signals like, hey, you need to be the submissive one because I'm the dominant one here. Males that are unflanged can remain in this state for their entire lives, but obviously it wouldn't be beneficial to do this if they weren't mating at all. If they were delaying mating entirely, because they look like females. So females probably aren't really going to be attracted to them because they think they're looking at another female, because they know that males, the males that they're trying to choose, the dominant males that they want to mate with, have these big old prominent features. What this does then is provide the unflanged males with an alternative mating mechanism pathway. And this is sneaking copulations. Basically, by not developing these big old cheek flanges and throat sac, they avoid competition with the dominant male because he's huge. They don't want to challenge him unless they know that they're going to win, right? So they allows them to not have to compete with this bigger male. But they can kind of sneak into the female groups because they look like a female. And so females are like, girl, get in here, girl, hang out, right? The females think that this is another female, so they let them hang out in the group. Now, a key thing that I haven't put on the screen, but I do want to mention and emphasize, is that by sneaking copulations, sometimes what I mean is that they coerce copulations, and copulations just means sex or mating. And what I mean is that they force themselves upon female orangutans. Because otherwise females aren't going to actively choose them because they don't look like the dominant males. Now, In anthropology, there's a debate about whether or not we call this act of forcing the copulation, forcing mating, if we call that rape. And ultimately, we have come to the consensus that we should not. So we call it forced copulation or coerced copulation, meaning that the male is forcing himself upon the female. The reason we distinguish between forced copulations in orangutans and rape in humans is because of the cognitive aspect. Humans know that rape is wrong. We know morally, ethically that rape is not right. You're taking somebody else's bodily autonomy away from them. That is generally considered bad. And we have the ability in our brains to morally sort between what is right and what is wrong. We know that is morally wrong to take somebody's body like that. We cannot say whether orangutans have the same ability to think through and to understand the consequences of what they're doing. It doesn't, so therefore we cannot say that it means the same thing. So because humans have the ability to know, to understand, to comprehend moral right and wrong, and we generally got rape as morally wrong, that means that when someone does it, they know what they're doing is wrong. And because of that, it deserves its own special word. In orangutans, because we can't speak to them the way that we speak to another human being, we cannot gauge whether they understand or whether there are any moral implications here, or whether this is just a driven biological act that doesn't have any underpinning in emotion. We can't give it the same term. So rape is uniquely human due to our higher cognitive functions. Okay, moving now to gorilla. So the genus is gorilla, but the species I'm talking about is also gorilla. So the entire name is gorilla. That's the binomial nomenclature. Gorillas are natively found in Africa. Males, like orangutans, are about 2 times the size of females, so very, very large. They use a unique form of quadrupedalism called knuckle walking, with their fingers curled under, and the weight is carried on fat pads on their knuckles. When males become about 12 or 13, they are sexually mature and they develop this silver hair on their backs, and that's why they are called silverbacks. Gorillas are mostly folivores. They are vegetarians. They can eat fruit depending on seasonality. They'll supplement, but they mostly eat plants, which is why their bodies are so big to house that complex digestive tract to break down all of this starchy cellulose-filled plant cells. Finally, the genus Pan. This is the genus most closely related to us. There are 2 species on the screen, Pan troglodytes, which I have mentioned multiple times in this lecture series, which are chimpanzees, and Pan paniscus, which is the bonobo. Chimpanzees are closest to us, but bonobos and chimps are very, very similar. Both of these species are primarily frugivorous. Chimps will definitely, both of them supplement, of course, like all primates, but chimps also have been documented eating meat and hunting other primates. So they are little vicious creatures. Some differences between bonobos and chimpanzees that might help you tell the difference is that bonobos are just slightly smaller than chimpanzees, and they are born with very dark faces, whereas chimpanzees tend to have lighter faces that are particularly distinguishable at birth or in their young age, in their youth. Both of these groups have moderate sexual dimorphism, so definitely nothing like males are 2 times the size of females. They are closer to about 20% bigger than females. And both of these groups are knuckle walkers when they are on the grounds. So that has been a whirlwind tour of current species, classifications, how we talk about primates, and basically an introduction to primatology. We are going to head to primate ecology in the next lecture, and we'll talk a little bit more about behavior, group structure, and that kind of thing.